If you are a wedding or event designer and AI still feels overwhelming, or maybe you've tried it and gave it everything you had, but it did not give you what you wanted, well, then you're in the right place. I've created over 94,000 images in MidJourney alone, including some very popular wedding designs on Pinterest, and I figured out what actually works so you don't have to waste hours struggling with bad prompts. I'm Alessandra and I help event pros master AI so they can create stunning wedding and event designs without wasting time. Today, we're diving into how to create breathtaking AI generated wedding ceremonies with simple prompts. All right, friends, so we're here on the MidJourney website. If you want to follow along in Discord, go for it. I prefer prompting in Discord. I love the convenience, but I know that MidJourney is encouraging new users to prompt on the website here. So that's what we'll go with, because as a beginner, there's a good chance that you're going to be in here too. So on our create page, we load, it usually launches the explore page, and then right underneath it is the create page. This box is up here is what kind of gets us going. And I can understand how this could be a lot. So we're going to hide that to get started. Now, here's something I always recommend when you're starting a new prompt and you're not sure where to begin. Go big. So wedding ceremony decor could be a lot of different things. Wedding, so maybe we'll say wedding ceremony arch decor, right? Start with something simple like that. And every time we run it again, especially when we're in our early stages and we don't really know exactly what we're doing, we want to just add a little extra, one or two more words, because if you add a whole bunch all at once, you're not going to know what went wrong, what went right. You just won't know. So look at now that we've gone from wedding ceremony decor to wedding ceremony arch decor. So now we have a clear and defined arch. It's still for a wedding. It's still beautiful. Lots of florals. And we're just getting going. We're getting going here. So we're going to stay, and we can reuse this. We could rerun it. If you're like, oh, this is kind of close, you can use these buttons, rerun, use, and more. We'll get to those in a second. So let's say we want to build on this. So we can click use and it'll pop it back up here. And we'll say, maybe we know that this is going to be an outdoor wedding. Let's say outdoor lawn wedding, because we know it's just going to be on the lawn. Maybe something like this. So we'll try that again and see how we're just slowly adding one more element every time. That's how we're going to refine this over time. And I promise this will get much quicker once you get going. While this is rendering, think about what would be popular for your clients next. Are we doing heavy florals, light florals? Are you more modern? Are you traditional? Because those are words that we're going to want to work in here. So all of these are getting closer and closer. I love that. Let's just say classic white flowers with draping, because that's kind of what we're already getting. But I want to show you when we add that same reinforcement in with text, what it'll come up with. Because when we're working on prompts and we're developing them, they're kind of like a formula, right? The AI is trying to interpret text and turn it into imagery for us. Text, that's why it's called text to image. And now I feel like we have a much more clear, defined, symmetrical design, where some of these are a little bit off centered, things like that. We're getting some pretty great pictures here. Now let's bring this text back up here and look at how our prompt has laid out so far. Wedding ceremony arch decor, the location outside, the colors, the texture, things like that. Notice how we started again with the wedding ceremony arch decor. That's the first thing you're seeing in the prompts. The earlier you mention something in a prompt is inherently going to make it more of a focus for the AI. So higher up, like the first few, I would say the first little area of your prompt, there's no like hard limit for this, but I would say the first thing is the most important thing to the AI. And the further you go along the prompt, I'm not saying the less important it is going to be the AI, but the less likely it is to be processed with as much emphasis. Let's put it that way. So I love these. These are coming out really good. Now, here is what I think a lot of people don't realize when they're prompting. You can see here, the default is a square ratio, aspect ratio. If you're in Discord, you would type AR, aspect ratio, and then 1:1 is the default. But there are a lot of other aspect ratios that make a difference. And the reason I'm telling you this is because, look, we're doing a great job. We've got some great prompts that are making some beautiful images. Let's say this is a classic look that you're going for your clients. Well, now we can start with this first box here, the image size. This is the aspect ratio that we're working with. So square is the default, and it's important to remember that because most AI models were trained on square images, and square is their default output. So you're most likely to have the best success with a square ratio. So I always recommend when you're trying a new prompt, leave it in the square. It'll make everything a lot nicer. See how everything's centered up beautifully. I mean, these are coming out great. Now here's what I want you to notice. When we switch to portrait, which could be a 3:4, or if you're doing 2:3 for Pinterest or 9:16 for mobile, you're going to get a lot of very different outcomes with that. Now that we have our prompt up here, we're going to add 9:16. And it's going to run. And you're going to see this is the more extreme one. But if you're creating something more vertical focused, like a mobile, you can see how it added AR 9:16. Depends what you're designing for. Most of the time, if you're just making a client presentation, I think you're going to find that the square is going to be just fine. But I do want to show you some of the other extremes where if we go landscape mode, like kind of what you're viewing now, so like maybe a 3:2. So we can always write 3:2 here, and we can always do the opposite, 16:9. You could tell them on the website as often, but you would just drag this over. So this would be like a YouTube potentially set up, which again, might not be good, but if you're doing big presentations, it might be. So let's take a look at while those are rendering. So these are the squares, right? We got some nice images, perfectly centered. You know exactly what that is. You could absolutely use that as inspiration for your client. Now look when we went to the extreme, which would be 9:16, also known as vertical, what you're seeing on your phone. Notice how the images aren't inherently centered. They're a little off. You're seeing them on an angle. That's because we technically didn't prompt for them to be centered, but the AI does not inherently want those pictures to be of a square item, right? An arch is generally square. From a composition point of view, it's just clearly struggling. We can fix it with some prompting and editing, but if you're new, it's going to be harder to troubleshoot. So that was 9:16. We can see 9:16 here. Again, we got kind of the weird angles. This one put a person in there. You know, the quality, I think, just isn't the same as what it was when we had these beautiful, nice square ratios. We have another one, same thing. They're okay. Like this, you know, they're all right. They're not perfect. Now we're going to the other end here with the 3:2. So this is a wider aspect ratio. Now look how much more detail we're getting in this, right? We can work on proportions and scales, but we're getting a lot more detail because the AI has the opportunity to spread out over a further larger space and really hone in extra details and elements and make the situation even, not the situation, but make the picture like even that much more full because it can add, there's just more space for it to play with. This is 16:9, so the super wide version. We got a close-up, which is, you know, fine. But I think it's interesting where we get either close-ups here or we get like a more zoomed out. So we'll rerun that just for a proof of concept here. And you could tell how the grids change when we have the different aspect ratios as they, you know, these are more vertical. They fit on all one line. The squares are obviously much shorter, but the wider we get, well, we're going to get a few rows here. Now, why am I telling you this? Because depending on what you are trying to render, if you have an elaborate wedding ceremony decor in mind, you're going to probably want to start with a square ratio, get your prompt going, and then switch over to a wider aspect ratio like the 16:9, which are very popular aspect ratios that you can use. And we'll probably get a better look. I mean, sorry, interrupting myself here, but like, this is great. This is beautiful. Could you imagine putting this in a presentation? Like, this is something you could make. And this is just a few minutes in, right? You got these big, beautiful pedestals, nice lawn. I love this a lot. All of these, very decent quality, I mean, I'm not sure what these glass vases are, but whatever, we can fix that. We can render more. I like that the Chiavari chairs are already put in here by default. Okay. So, seed codes. I wish this was something I learned earlier on. They're kind of tricky to get your mind around if you don't understand how these images are created. But if you can imagine what old TV static looks like in your mind, that's kind of the diffusion model. That's what it's called, the diffusion model that a lot of text to image, text to video are rendered with. I am not qualified to explain the inner workings of how that is coming together, but I think you could Google it and probably find somebody better spoken in that. But what I want to show is that is using a seed code, which there's something like 4 billion of them, I think, available out there. And they'll be different from model to model. What happens is when you put an arbitrary number like 5783 or whatever in your picture, and you include that same prompt again with the same everything, the same parameters and the same seed code, it is going to make a nearly identical image for you, sets of images. So like, here's the same one over and over. You could tell it's pretty similar. And then like this one here, we can tell that, maybe some of the hydrangeas are slightly off, but they're nearly identical images. But what gets interesting, and this is what I love for testing purposes, is because now look what happens. When we go from a 16:9, the vertical ratio or the horizontal ratio, to a square ratio, completely changes. Still similar aesthetics. We're still by a lake on a lawn for our fourth picture, lake and a lawn for the fourth picture. Our second picture has some Spanish moss in it. So there are some overlaps, but not the same. And then look what happens when we get vertical. You would have never guessed, but it is the same seed code. So when you're trying different things, knowing how to render the seed code might be helpful for you when you're learning. I would not use it while you're experimenting for client purposes, but while you're learning, knowing how to add, and it's literally just as simple as -- seed, and then you type whatever number you want, or and then there are ways you can pull the information from the images that you rendered, but we'll go into that later. Now this is the same seed code, but I had changed the prompt to say pink orchids and white hydrangeas. Kind of similar. I'm looking at this fourth picture as a benchmark, and the second one here because we're on a lawn with a lake. We're on a lawn with some sort of Spanish moss. We did get some flowers in there. This one I thought was so interesting. Same seed code, but we added blue hydrangeas, white roses, and just for fun, I threw in gold drapery. And man, we got the flowers. We got the flowers in that one. And this one we tried classic white and pink flowers with draping. We didn't specify the draping color, so I think that's probably why we got some pink or peach drapes. This again, same seed code, but all I did was add red flowers. That's all I did. We had classic white flowers with draping. I said classic white and red flowers with draping. Again, same seed code. It's wild to figure out how prompting works, but this is a way for you to figure out how much of a difference some of your choice of words can make. Now we're working with very simple prompts right now, so while the order matters, they're fairly short, all things considered. But just as an example, here's what we were working with before: wedding ceremony, arch decor, outdoor lawn wedding, classic white flowers and draping. And then at the end, we had put white and red flowers with draping. Again, probably redundant, but we had it in there anyway. So I was like, let's just go with it. Now in this one, I put white and red flowers at the beginning. You can see white and red flowers. Now technically there's more white flowers than red because white was first, but this one where we put red and white flowers, I think there are more red flowers in here, but that's just me. Totally TBD. Like, we don't need to have multiples of stuff. It's not gonna really hurt anything, but I don't think it does you any favors either. But I think as your prompts get more advanced, you'll notice and trim them out more. We're gonna use this as our base prompt with the red and white flowers. This is gonna be a good baseline to have here. Now we're gonna move to this middle section for today. It'll be a good starting point just to have in your brain. I don't expect you to know all of this in practice, but stylization, it influences how strongly the MidJourney aesthetic is applied. So the higher the stylization value, they are potentially more pretty, more artistic, but they'll be less closer to the prompt potentially. Where the lower you get, will produce images that are more prompt accurate, but maybe less pretty, less aesthetic. That's why it's under the aesthetic category. So by default, MidJourney has you at 100. You can go in and change your particular defaults, but that's what we've been running on here. All right, I've got a few rendered, and I just want to make sure for the folks following along on Discord, if you wanted to change this, you would just do your prompt and then -- style to 50, style 500, you know, just pick one, you know, put whatever number in that you want. So here's style 0. That means that MidJourney, when it was rendering, it said, okay, we want this to be as close to the prompt as possible. Clearly it's okay, not very pretty, especially when we look at style 100, which was our baseline. Now we bumped it up to 50. We're getting there. It looks a little wonky, things are rendering a little weird, but there are red flowers with white flowers and drapery, so it's technically not wrong. I ran it on 20 just as a midterm kind of thing, and you can tell that I would not share these with a client. But then look what happens when we bump it up to 250. These are much prettier, much more aesthetic. I mean, we did not get pretty columns and gazebos and stuff in here. There's a lot more detail going on in these, a lot more going on in the background. We get a lot more sunlight. We got the petals going down here. That's on 550, 750 going up. And again, this is a numbers game, right? Like, you can run and rerun some of these over and over, and you know, some of the values you'll find will be a better fit for what you're rendering, right? It's all a random numbers game, because this might have 750, you might look at this and go, I think it might be not my thing, or 1,000, but it might just have been that random seed code. So when we rerun it, for all we know, the next 750 that you get is going to be perfect. So it's all about figuring out what works good. So now we're looking at style raw, and you're probably like, what in the world is that? I truthfully don't use it a ton, but I use it sometimes when I'm developing a prompt and I'm not sure what's working. For those of you on Discord, all you would do to get style raw is style raw. Just add that at the end of your prompt. If you're here in the website version, you would go from standard to raw, and it just says that raw mode replaces the aesthetic version in some of the MidJourney versions, and it can help create more photorealistic images, cinematic scenes, cuter characters. For me, what that mostly means is MidJourney has a default aesthetic style, and once you start generating, you'll be able to spot a MidJourney versus maybe a Stable Diffusion versus maybe a Flux image potentially over time. The raw or style raw pretty much just strips away any of the implied MidJourney styling and aesthetics. There is a time and a place for it, but if you're just troubleshooting your prompts and you're like, wow, like look at the difference on these, you know, like big difference. And if we can rerun this, and we can rerun it with we could still add style 1000, which gets kind of confusing, I know, but there's a big difference in how all of these images are rendering, right? So just something to play with. I would venture to say you probably don't want to use it too early on, but if you're just trying to figure out why your prompt isn't working, is it a MidJourney thing, or is it a language thing, like you're not using the right inputs, sometimes adding style raw can help clarify what the at least what the AI is interpreting from your prompt. Let's put it that way. Now, these are the reruns of the higher stylized values. Note the detailing in the drapery is a lot more. We've got some golden hour lighting potentially here. We've definitely got some bumped up backgrounds in these. So this is all going to depend on what your aesthetic is, what you're going for, what you're trying to render for your client. But this is the one we just did. So this is Style Raw, and this is Style Raw, but with the stylization bumped up as high as it goes. Conflicting, yes, sort of, but it's just a different type of output. So I hope that doesn't overwhelm you too much, but what I want you to take away from this is stylization is defaulted to 100. I think that's a great place for you to start. I would bump it up maybe to 250 as an early stages prompter, and I wouldn't vary too much higher because it gets a little bit too crazy, to be honest. Speaking of crazy, we'll get into the weirdness, variety, and some of these other things later on, but for now, I think this is a good place to stop for lesson 1. Now, I hope that you take this and you go practice a few different ceremony designs and practice different aspect ratios with your prompts and see how they render. You know, if you're the florist, let's say, designing, you might not necessarily need the wide aspect ratio that is going to render the chairs and the aisle and stuff like that. But maybe you do. I don't know. But if you're the rental company doing, let's say, some urns and some lanterns or something down the aisle, you might want the wider aspect ratio so that it gets added to your prompt and to your design, where a square ratio, it might be harder to get all of that in one image. I hope that makes sense. Don't worry, I'll be back soon with episode 2, where we'll dive into the next set of parameters and things you need to know about prompting on MidJourney. All right, friends. Well, I'm Alessandra. I hope that this has helped you get a little bit of a start on MidJourney prompting with AI for your events. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future lessons.